Hello, welcome to the Cinema Museum. We are based in the Old Lambeth Workhouse, which is this beautiful Victorian building you can see behind me. It opened in 1873. The site was huge and housed 1,400 people at its height. The most famous person who came into this workhouse as a child was Charlie Chaplin, aged 7. He was with his mother Hannah and his older brother Sidney. So please come inside and I'll show you some of the artefacts and explain what the museum is all about. The Cinema Museum is about the experience of going to the pictures in Britain between 1920 and 1960. The collection comprises interior design, decor and technical equipment from cinemas, most of which no longer exist. And here we have 3 examples of projectors. They're all from the 1930s. Being a projectionist was a very skilled job. The training took 5 years as an apprentice, and then you became a chief operator. This is a typical reel of film loaded onto a spool that would have been put on one of these projectors. The changeovers from one projector to another would usually be absolutely seamless, so the audience would have no understanding that there were 2 projectors showing the films, and because there are 2 feature films being shown in every programme, there would be possibly 6 to 8 reels per film. These are ticket price indicators, letting people know the prices of the tickets and the various sections of the cinema, the stalls, the rear stalls, the circle, the back circle, etc. They're all pre-decimal, and lots of people remember 1 and 3 and 1 and 9. 1 and 3pence is roughly equivalent to 7 pence in today's money. Cinema has always been a cheap form of entertainment. It started off as a working class form of entertainment in music halls and travelling fairgrounds before purpose-built cinemas started being built after 1910. It still is a cheap form of entertainment, even though people complain to me about the cost of tickets today, particularly in the West End of London. But if you compare it to the cost of a theatre ticket, a pop concert ticket, or a major sporting event ticket, it certainly is a cheap form of entertainment.
This is a sandwich board, or half of a sandwich board. There's another half of it round the corner. It's in 2 parts, where one goes on the front, one on the back, with straps over the shoulder. And I remember a man who would walk up and down the main street advertising films at the Majestic. It's remarkably heavy, and it had canvas shoulder straps. This is Anne Sheridan, Dick Powell. Anne Sheridan was called the Oomph Girl. She worked for Warner Brothers, as did Dick Powell. So this is a Warner Brother double feature, because Ronald Reagan, the future president, also worked, and here he is in Code of the Secret Service. They're both made in 1939.
So these are known as category boards, and they are positioned near the box office, telling people the certificate given to the film by the then British Board of Film Censors, now the British Board of Film Classification, who started life in 1912. This particular category board has a rare example of the category H for horrific. It was introduced around 1936 and lasted till 1951, when it was replaced by the X certificate, which is now the 18 certificate. And this meant if you were under the age of 16, there was no way you were supposed to be able to get in to see the film. And many people, like me when I was a child, if my parents couldn't take me, I went to the cinema anyway, and I hung around outside until a pleasant-looking adult appeared and I asked them to take me in. People, of course, are horrified today at the thought of this, but it was done by thousands and thousands of people, and that's just what you did. It was more important to get into the film than who you saw the film with.
We're in the library. One of the things I'm very proud of is the Cinema News and Property Gazette, which is all these volumes from 1912, the very first issue, right through to the 70s when it became Screen International. We've got other things here, the Spotlight, We have again from the first issue, 1927, and I think the first 10 years complete, and then lots of other later ones up to relatively recently. And then above that there's the Film Daily yearbooks, the American magazine's annual, and then beyond that is the Motion Picture Herald Almanac, which again is a yearly publication, and all sorts of other things like the American Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences Actors Guide. And then we have other elements like actors. This is people behind the camera, and they're in alphabetical order. And then the actors are on that wall and the wall on the left. And then the subjects, so the Western books about Westerns, thrillers, film critics and so on, are all in little groups, comedy films and so on. So
the museum has a collection of cinema uniforms, ushers, usherettes and commissionaires. These are from the 1930s. This is an usherette's uniform from a cinema in Aberdeen. They often had this rather militaristic style to them, which I think was specifically to give people confidence when wearing the uniform, because they were dealing with members of the public, and as today, most of the ushers and usherettes in the cinema would be young people. The museum has been donated some cinematic teapots from Ian Allen, who's best known as being the creator of Mr. Spoon on Button Moon, a children's TV programme. So this is King Kong climbing the wrong building. These are just generics celebrating the millennium. This is a courting couple in a double seat in the back row. Cinemas were one of the few places that couples could go to where they wouldn't be observed by their parents. This is the Odeon Kingston, now a nightclub. This is the Odeon Tolworth, which I believe is now gone. And here we have a can of the floral scent they would spray into the atmosphere to attempt to freshen up the auditorium. You have to remember that people would smoke in the cinema, and many people have this romantic illusion of the beam of light from the projector with the tendrils of smoke in it, evoking the romance of cinema. But the reality was, you were sitting inside a huge ashtray, and you came out smelling like one.
when films began, there were two difficulties with them. One was that they were in black and white, and you lost the natural colours. There were various attempts to introduce colour, which were in some cases very successful indeed. And then the other thing was that the films were silent, and you didn't hear what people were saying except by reading a title card which told you what the conversations were. There was a series of attempts to try and bridge this gap, and Cecil Hepworth, the British filmmaker, he introduced the Vivaphone before the First World War, which was a system where they used a commercial record, and they would go to the person who'd made the record, and they would say, if we play the record here, could you mouth the words of the songs, because they were usually singing, could you mouth the songs, and we can film it, and then we'll match the two together. Well, that was all right in theory, but of course in practice it turned out to be fairly different, because you had the length of the cinema. One end had the projector, the other end had the gramophone. The gramophone had to be near, behind or close to the screen, so the sound appeared to be coming from the screen, because it was all mechanical. And so it was very difficult to keep the two elements in synchronism. The French, Gaumont, they had a very successful system, if you could call it successful, where in order to get the volume to fill huge cinemas, they had a compressor which pushed the airwaves out. So, because sound is just a movement of air, so the compressor increase the sound by pushing it out with force. And so you got more volume, but you needed a machine running. It was all complicated and difficult. It was all given up in the end until the Leader Forest developed the radio valve in the middle of the 20s, and then you could amplify the sound to any volume you want. You could also have the record player could be in the projection room with a wire going down the cinema to a speaker, which could be by the screens. You now had the two items in the same place. Then the Western Electric Company, the big electronic company, and Warner Brothers decided to get together to develop something called Vitaphone. And that was when it really took off. The sound was tremendously popular when it arrived. Al Jolson, of course, talking in the first film. It was the 16-inch record, which you see here. A record that size ran for 10 minutes maximum. So that was a one-reel of film. The premiere of the Warner Brothers Vitaphone system was in 1926. Was a feature film called Don Juan with John Barrymore, a very famous classical American actor. The film had music recorded from an orchestra which reflected the moods of the film, and then there were sound effects, but no dialogue. It was accompanied by a number of Vitaphone shorts, which had singing and music hall people telling jokes and so on, but it was seen as a kind of novelty. But only when the very big and charismatic star Al Jolson in the film The Jazz Singer said a few words to his mother. The film was basically silent with music accompanying, but no dialogue. The dialogue was printed on the title as you read and then he spoke to his mother, and suddenly the world seemed to go wild about it. It was a very interesting and good quality system, but there were many, many problems with it. One of the problems was, of course, the records were brittle, they got easily broken, so when the porters threw the boxes of films and records onto the station to be shipped to the cinema, the records got broken. So you would land up with a beautiful brand new film and the sound in pieces in the box. So that was one difficulty. The other difficulty was, of course, that the sound boxes that contained the needle that ran on the grooves, it could break through the wax into the next groove, and sometimes what you got was what you got was what you got was what you got was what you got, and it would keep repeating, and you'd lost synchronism. You couldn't find that synchronism again. You just had to start the next reel and switch over. So there were so many problems that they decided that the Leader Forest system, which was photographing the sound waves onto the edge of the film, Warner Brothers and Vitaphone decided that this was really a better system. They bought out the patents and so on. And that lasted right up until the digital revolution. There were various improvements to it. That was the system that was used right up till the end.
The museum does have a film collection. We do have some unique material, and these boxes behind me relate to one collection of 70 films made by a company called Mitchell & Kenyon, who made films from 1898 to 1913. After 1913, they stored all the film material that they had in the basement of the building that was their film and photography shop, which they eventually sold, and the films remained undiscovered until a local historian found something about them, and we have approximately 70 of these films. Most of the films are little knockabout comedies where policemen lose their trousers and get pushed into ponds, snowball fights break out and that kind of thing. They're beautiful camera negatives, so the quality is extremely high. The films that went to the British Film Institute, approximately 800, are all factual films, so it shows life in Edwardian Britain in every aspect: sporting events, public events, even putting the camera on the front of the tram to take what's known as a phantom ride.
This is a very important piece of our collection for me. It's a big board that displays the film stills. If you see sometimes, you have a photograph of a high street and there's a cinema in the picture, and you see people bending over looking at the stills in the frames outside, because they're illustrating what the films may be about. So if you don't like westerns and it's clear it's a cowboy film, you might go to the next cinema. You won't bother going in there. So this comes from Aberdeen, along with many of the other items here. Aberdeen was near the village where I was born, and I went to the city of Aberdeen and became a projectionist there. And I worked for the company who owned the cinema that this board was in. Later on, when I was an apprentice and about 16, 17, I went into work at 9:30 in the morning on Monday, and the manager rang up. He said, could you go over to the Majestic this week? There's somebody on holiday there and they're showing a 3D film. So I went over to the Majestic and helped them with the 3D. There was a crew of us in the projection room. The 3D that came out in the 50s, again, to try and draw people away from television. There were two cameras in two different positions pointing at the same position. So you got two slightly different views of the same thing. Then they were filmed through Polaroid filters, a left and a right, and then you had glasses to wear while you were watching the films, so they were projected on top of each other, and your glasses separated it out so that this eye saw the right-hand projector film and this one saw the film photographed by the left-hand camera. You had to show them together, and they had to be absolutely in synchronism. In the end, of course, they didn't continue with it because the extra patronage didn't pay for itself. It got to be the novelty wore off. So you found that the later 3D films were shown without being in 3D. In other words, there was only one of the films was shown on its own, and it was therefore had no 3D effect. But you knew it had been photographed in 3D because all through the story there would be things being pointed at the camera, spears. There were objects being thrown somehow toward the camera, but of course you didn't duck because it wasn't very effective. It was flat on the screen, but you knew it had been filmed in 3D, and they hadn't bothered to show it.
I'm sitting in our main auditorium where most of our events take place. When this was the workhouse, this was the chapel. The kind of events that the museum puts on are film screenings, Q&As with people from the film industry talking about their careers. Sometimes we have theatrical events. And we also have reunions where the cast of a TV series are on stage talking about their experiences of working on the series. The museum has an artist in residence, Anna Odrick, and she's created several pieces for the museum, including a lens wall, the decorations for our bar, and this imposing statue of Charlie Chaplin. Now, this is a maquette, which is a representation of what the real thing will look like, and she's hoping it'll be at the Elephant and Castle. This particular maquette is actually made out of cardboard, but the illusion is wonderful, and we love having Charlie in the middle of the room.
Here's one of the many books about Charlie Chaplin, and in it there's a picture of the workhouse that he attended, and right behind me is the very same workhouse, which is with the one that we occupy. If you can hear me above the noise of the building works going on, but Here we are just outside the gates of the old Lambeth workhouse.